So we talk about, are you going to have a period of time before you compete that you're going to just go off social media, that you're going to delete the apps, you're not going to pay attention to that. You're going to let somebody else take care of that for you because you really need to focus. And some of them really want that kind of a plan because it is too distracting and it's upsetting sometimes. People will say things that aren't very supportive or helpful sometimes, and that sticks with the athletes. And so we talk about for each athlete what they need and what that plan is going to be. But I always recommend to athletes that they have a plan for how they want to deal with social media.
Welcome to today's episode of Coach Noah Talks, powered by Integrity Golf Performance. I hope you enjoy. I could imagine in the future becoming kind of an equalizer. I don't have the funds to fly to, let's say, whatever country my next professional golf event is, where somebody else might have those resources, but I could put on a headset and get some exposure to that. So I think that piece of it can give more people the opportunity to really elevate their preparation to a certain extent. Whereas in the past, especially in golf, you get like a practice round before a tournament, you get one practice round. But now I could walk the course 20 times and from my home, or see the course 20 times. And maybe I don't feel comfortable. I don't like being around other people as much. And I can just do this from my home. So I think that's in the future. It's still early times, but I see that in the future, hopefully in other sports as well, as a way to sort of level the playing field. Whereas before, if I have one person who can go there 2 weeks before because they have the funds and the opportunities, and somebody else from a different country that for whatever reason just can't do that, this opens up new avenues to prepare.
Yes, I think that really could be something we see in the future. And to expand on that point a little bit, I think one of the things athletes face when they walk into a new environment that they haven't been in before is it takes time to process all of that. So you walk in and all the visual cues, taking in where is what and what's going on and what does it look like and where do I go to the locker room? Where do I go to get food? Just taking in all those components of a new environment. Plus you're trying to get ready to compete. So there's a lot of processing going on. And if someone has seen the venue or the site before, they walk in, they go, oh yeah, there's that, and that looks familiar to me. There's less of that processing, and they can then immediately focus on training or getting prepared for their competition. But that was the way that we used the VR for Tokyo, because we had a test event going into that, and some of our team went, but not everybody who ended up qualifying for the Olympics was at that test event. So some of our Olympians walked into Tokyo cold, never having been in that venue before this is for diving. And so, but they were able to see the VR that I had taken at the test event. So they felt more familiar with that environment. So I think that just helps in the beginning, managing some of that anxiety and worry of the newness of an environment as you walk in. The more familiarity you have, the better.
And is that something from your experience working with Olympians and Paralympians of someone who is their second or third time versus their first time attending one of these incredible events? Up until that point, do you see those people who've gone 2 or 3 times that they do have, obviously the location is completely different, but do you see that there is more of a comfort factor because they've been to the Olympics before, they kind of know what's sort of how it is versus that first time Olympian or Paralympian?
Yes, definitely that is the case. And I almost think sometimes athletes need an Olympics to prepare for the next Olympics, to work out all those kinks, but that's often not the case that they have that opportunity. But those who have been to multiple Olympics, we do talk about that, and they'll say, oh God, the first Olympics, I was just trying to figure out what was going on, now, and everyone is different, of course, but now we can go through certain scenarios, well, you remember when you went the first Olympics and remember the things that might have thrown you off a little bit. Let's be ready for those this time so that you have a good plan and a good way to cope. And I do that a lot with the teams I work with. We talk about what if scenarios before they go to the Olympics, and these are based on things that have happened or things that I have heard from other athletes or coaches that have happened. And we talk about everything from what if you forgot your credential in the village and, you're already at the competition. What do you do? What if, everything from that to what if there's a death in your family? How do we manage that in the most important event of your life? And so we talk about these things and to prepare, but even, and that's helpful. I really think it is, but there's something about actually experiencing it and knowing how to cope that is different than hearing about it. So going through the process of an Olympics, I think there's nothing like it, but hopefully the VR gets you a little bit closer to understanding what that's going to be like.
Very interesting. Yeah, because even those at first you think, okay, well, why is it important that I know what the airport arrival section looks like? But it's just one more thing that you're familiar with, which is less likely to create some sort of anxiety or necessary stressors that are already going to be there because you're competing in these events.
Yeah, and I travel a lot. I've been to a lot of airports in the world. But when I go to an airport I've never been to before, I know that just increases the anxiety just a little bit because I'm thinking, okay, well, how is this set up and how am I going to get to my next flight? The ones I've been to a lot, I feel much more comfortable because I know how it's set up and I know how to get from place to place. And so it's the same for the athletes. It's just maybe a little more anxiety to add to the big anxiety. If we can minimize some of the little anxiety, it helps.
And going back to interesting what you were talking about with the what ifs, and that's one thing I've also tried to use with golfers is obstacles, goals, and actions. So before each event, what are the anticipated obstacles that you think you might, and we usually try to find 2 to 4, right? What do you think might come up for you? And they're very rarely technical things like I'm not going to hit the ball well. I might have a bad stretch and then I'm going to start doubting myself. And then we go through and say, well, what are the goals for that obstacle? What is the ideal outcome, basically? Kind of the opposite. And then what is the action? So what is something kind of a prevention plan? Like what is the action I can take if and when I face this obstacle in that situation? And just that sounds very similar to what you were talking about of what if, and if we identify 2 to 4, obviously they're playing on a more frequent basis and it's not one major, the Olympics and Paralympics are at a different magnitude, but on a weekly basis, hey, this week I think I might encounter this obstacle. I've already thought about it and I know what my action can and should be if I do encounter that. And if I don't, great, I didn't encounter it, but it didn't hurt me having that plan.
Yeah, I think that's great for just day-to-day things or any competition. And what I usually tell athletes is that, we're going to pick some things that you think could happen. Chances are, not all of these things will happen, or it's probably going to be something else. But the exercise of going through this process of realizing that something's probably going to go wrong or it's going to be unexpected, it's going to throw you off a little bit. And then having thought about strategies to use or tools you have to help you get through that's going to help you with whatever happens. And it's probably going to be something completely different. And I can't tell you how many times they've come back to me and said, you were right. It was something totally different, but I knew what to do, And so I think that exercise is useful in so many ways.
I wanted to kind of switch gears a bit. It's sort of related. There's a research paper that you co-authored titled Athlete Mental Health in the Olympic Paralympic Quadrennium, a multi-societal consensus statement. But I mainly related to this idea of, a lot of stress and anxiety in these unfamiliar environments. In that paper and position stand, it talks a bit about also social media. And one thing I was curious about is, do you feel like over time, you've been at many of these events over time, has social media and everything that falls under that made it harder for these athletes to avoid unnecessary stressors during these times compared to before, or when social media was kind of still a very new thing, kind of like VR is now?
Well, social media is a whole other topic that we have to face with athletes now and have a plan for. So it used to be we would have a plan for friends and family, when they come to watch and they want to spend time with the athletes, but the athletes have to focus, what's going to be the plan for how how and when you see your friends and family. Well, now we also have to have a social media plan because that can be such a distraction. And so that's something that we talk about ahead of time also, depending on how involved athletes are. Some of them are really involved with social media. Some of them are not as much. Some of them have agents that help them with that. And so they kind of just pass it off. But I think that almost everybody now is impacted by that. So we talk about, are you going to have a period of time before you compete that you're going to just go off social media, that you're going to delete the apps, you're not going to pay attention to that. You're going to let somebody else take care of that for you because you really need to focus. And some of them really want that kind of a plan because it is too distracting and it's upsetting sometimes. People will say things that aren't very supportive or helpful sometimes, and that sticks with the athletes. And so we talk about for each athlete what they need and what that plan is going to be, or maybe if they're going to have someone else manage it for them while they're really focused on their training and their performance. And afterwards, they can do whatever they want with it. But each athlete, I always recommend to athletes that they have a plan for how they want to deal with social media, and not just social media, interview requests and things like that. Is there a period of time where they're just going to say, no, I won't do any interviews in, the 3 days leading into my competition, but afterwards I'm open to any requests. So just having a plan, I think is the most useful thing there.
Interesting. Yeah. And that's something probably a lot of people can take, is that even for them, is if they're trying to compete at a certain level, that having a plan in place, and it's not saying that this is the right way, this is the wrong way, but knowing ahead of time that what you want to do and have the reason behind what your plan is going to be. But that's interesting. That sort of plan didn't need to even be thought of, 20 years ago or whenever.
Right.
Less than that even.
I mean, usually we had a media plan. So, with the interview requests and things like that, because I'd seen too many athletes underperform when they got pulled into lots of interviews right before they competed, and it threw their focus off. So we have plans for that, but yes, now we're adding the social media plan as well.
I think I have a bit more time. I want to expand a bit on other elements of that research paper. Can you kind of share from your perspective about that paper, what stood out to you, or what things you'd want maybe just listeners to know that might be practical to them, or just in general what the consensus was?
Yeah, so the paper came out of a think tank, an international mental health think tank that we held here at the USOPC. And so we had professionals in psychology and sports psychology and mental health from many different countries of the world. And we came together to talk about how could we best support athletes. And we looked at pre-Olympics in that training phase, the resources that athletes need and the challenges they face. We looked at during the Olympics, same kind of thing. And then post-Olympics. And I think what stood out for me was, well, one, the need, everybody from different countries, we were all seeing similar things, that there was a huge need for athletes to have support for primarily, I think, their mental health. We've always looked at performance and sports psychology to support performance, but the mental health piece, that's across the board in other countries as well. So I think there were so many commonalities that way. So that stood out. But I guess the other thing that was meaningful for me was the post-Olympics. And we traditionally have not done a great job of helping athletes in the aftermath of the Olympics. Even the athletes who perform well, win a gold medal or win a medal or, overachieve from what they expected, they struggle afterwards. You would think it's the ones who don't do well, they didn't meet their goals, they struggle, kind of have some depressive characteristics, whatever. But it happens also for athletes who perform well. There's a big letdown that happens after the Olympic Games. And I think that we don't talk enough about that sometimes, and athletes aren't prepared for it, and they don't realize that it can be really tough. So talking about that and knowing that seems to be across the board, we were able to offer some suggestions for what to do. And I think we've done a much better job here at the USOPC in having resources for athletes to follow up after the games, mental health resources, resources to help them transition out of sport if that's their choice, to move into the work world. We have a program that offers a lot of discussion and training and opportunities that way. So we've done a much better job of following up and assessing athletes for mental health needs, offering them resources, getting them connected with providers. And that's something that we hadn't done as well before.
Can you touch on what is it that makes it hard sometimes for even the successful Olympians and Paralympians to, in that post phase? Is it the athletic identity piece and, they've gone from this super culminating experience, or what? I mean, there's not one answer to that, obviously, but what are some of the reasons that is actually difficult, even for people who had great success?
Yeah, it does vary. But I think, one of the things that happens is at the Olympics, we're in this sort of make-believe world that is different than anything else. For the athletes, they're living in the village. Everything's taken care of for them. Food, there's medical staff right there. It's all about their training and their competition, and it's all about them. And there's lots of amazing opportunities they get, meeting people from all around the world. If they do well, lots of interviews, and the world knows about them, and it's amazing. And then you go home and you don't have any of that, right? So you got to take care of yourself now. I would say that for most athletes, unless they're a very high profile athlete, even if they did well, the requests for interviews or speaking engagements sort of drop off, and you're kind of back to, people don't remember that you won a medal even for a lot of these athletes. And if the sport is not well known, nobody remembers that. So you're kind of back to making your way in the world, and it's challenging. But everybody thinks you should be doing amazing because, wow, you won a medal at the Olympics. So there's that piece of it that I think that letdown, that, maybe a month or so after things are still kind of going, and then you're back to the real world. And then you're making decisions about, do I go another quad? Do I get back to training? Then there's the grind of that. Or if there was an injury, maybe there's a surgery that has to happen to repair that injury that, they were putting off so that they could compete. So, there's just a lot of things and decisions that have to be made. And sometimes athletes don't feel they have a lot of resources to do that. So that is one scenario that can happen for sure. And, maybe if athletes don't feel they have a great support system, or they're moving away from sport and that was their support system, and now maybe they don't feel they have a great support system, and, it can take an emotional toll. So there's a lot of ways that can go.
Can you touch on your experience with athletic identity? Because at least from my experience working with golfers and high-level golfers, I find that they're very siloed. A lot of them are very siloed, and they don't have other outlets of their life. And a lot of times their practice is not so much centered around performance and getting better. It's just, there's nothing else for me to fill my day with that's out there because I've been doing this for XYZ number of years. If you have any thoughts, maybe you have a different opinion, but from my reflection, it's just that this, for a lot of golfers, it's just that is who they are and their athletic identity, and that's neither good nor bad. But I just thought, from your perspective, working with all different types of athletes, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that actually is a really important piece that I didn't mention. And especially if an athlete is retiring and moving away from sport, that has been all they've known, perhaps, for so many years. And that lifestyle of training and traveling, you don't find that in many professions. And so now they're looking to try to move into the work world maybe, and it is not the same. It's a pretty rude awakening sometimes. So, that identity that they had as an athlete, now they're having to redefine that, and it's not easy. So we do find athletes, sometimes they will go into coaching, or they will somehow stay connected with the sport because that is such a part of who they are. But others want to find something different, and it can be a struggle. So yeah, that's something that, that's why we offer mental health services and counseling to work through that. And that loss of identity. And then are there other identities that you start to pick up? What are those going to be? So it's a process, definitely a long process.
Last question I really have is, are there any projects or things you can share that you're working on or that you're interested in? Obviously, you're somewhat on the cutting edge with this VR piece, if there's any insights there. And then if there's any books that you would recommend for listeners for any reason, just books that have been impactful in your life in some capacity.
Yeah, I would say in terms of projects, I'm continuing on with the VR project. My funding is a little bit iffy, so that is a bit directing where I go with that. But I'm continuing on to try to gather more footage for more sports, and to update what I have so that it is relevant to the athletes I'm working with. Some other things not as related to that is we're trying to get a mindfulness program going for athletes. It's not that we do mindfulness here at the USOPC, but we're trying to formalize it a little bit more so more athletes have access to it. So we are working on getting that going. And sleep has become a big topic of conversation, sleep and performance. And we are really trying to dive into how we can best support our athletes in sleep technology, understanding sleep and how it impacts performance. So those are a couple things that are in the works right now. In terms of books, I will be honest that right now, I wish I had more time to read, and that is on my list of things to do, but I have found that is falling to the wayside. So I really want to be doing that more than I am, but I hope maybe over the holidays I'll have a little time to catch up. But when you said that, a couple of books came to mind that I had read recently, and one is called The Rise of Superman by Stephen Kotler, and he wrote another one called Stealing Fire. He wrote it with a co-author, and he talks a lot about flow and high-level performances and extreme performances, and how people are able to do that, like rock climbing, or what are the guys that climb, without any kind of harness or anything like that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, free climbing or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that, like people who do that, like the mindset of someone who does those kinds of extreme activities. And I found that super useful. A lot of the sports, the acrobat athletes are doing some pretty extreme things, not climbing without a harness, but, they do extreme things. And so it was useful to me to think about the mindset of somebody who gets into those areas and, how they get into flow and how they can perform under that kind of pressure where it's literally life and death. So I found those to be pretty interesting.
Great. I'll include those in the notes.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Cogan, I really, really appreciate your time today. I enjoyed the conversation, learned a lot about VR. So thank you for taking the time to speak with me.
Sure thing. Yeah. Thank you for having me. It was great talking about all this.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Coach Noah Talks, powered by Integrity Golf Performance. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to the Golf Performance newsletter. This is where I share written, audio, and video content designed to help golfers take their game to the next level. All the relevant links from today's episode and to the newsletter can be found below. See you next time.